Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lauren Gorlick. I serve as the Community Relations Coordinator for Haven House, and I want to welcome you all to today's webinar for our Domestic Violence Month speaker series. Today is Through a Child's Eyes, How Domestic Violence Affects Our Youth. And I'm joined today by my colleagues Desmond and Tara. I do want to give folks a couple of more moments to log in and get settled. So we'll just wait a couple more moments and then begin our presentation. All right, everyone, it is 12 o'clock on the dot, so let us begin. Again, thank you all for joining us for today's webinar for our third webinar of the Domestic Violence Awareness Month speaker series. I'm so glad that you've chosen to join us today. Again, my name is Lauren Gorlick. I serve as Community Relations Coordinator for Child and Family Services Haven House program. I am joined today by my colleagues Desmond Truesdale and Tara Petty, and we're happy that you've joined us today. Before we begin, I do want to provide a couple of housekeeping items. First and foremost, I do want to thank our sponsors. Thank you very much to Alexandria Professionals, as well as the multiple other organizations and businesses who've joined us for this very special speaker series. We're so grateful for your support, and we couldn't do this without your help. So thank you very much. I also want to share that today's webinar will be a PowerPoint presentation. We'll have a Q&A section towards the end where you can include any questions that you have in the chat feature. So feel free to do that. Today's webinar will be recorded, so any messages that you do place in the chat function will be in the recording afterwards. And we will send that recording out on our Facebook and social media pages. I also want to note that in the chat function now is Child and Family Services website, as well as a link to Alexandria Professionals, our sponsor. If you do need to get in touch with Haven House, our hotline is available 24/7, and my colleagues are on the other end ready to answer any calls from any personal situations to any loved ones who you might be concerned about. That number is 884-6000. And again, it's available 24/7, as well as our online chat function on the website. Without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleagues. Again, I'm joined here today by Desmond Truesdale and Tara Petty. Tara is the Child and Family Advocate for Haven House. She runs the Parenting After Violence program, which also includes domestic violence education classes and the Parenting After Violence classes. She also provides individual counseling to parents who have experienced domestic violence. She's worked at Haven House for 2 years and enjoys seeing the growth of her clients as they begin to heal along their journey. She's since modified the domestic violence education program, as well as the Parenting After Violence classes in the wake of this pandemic. And she's responded to clients by moving the program from in-person meetings to over-the-phone conferencing. Tara is also a graduate of the University at Buffalo's social work program and holds a master in social work. I'm also joined by Desmond Truesdale. Desmond is the children's team lead at Haven House. He's been working at Haven House for 3 years and has been in the team lead position for 1 year. He's also worked as a residential advocate in the residential program at Haven House, as well as an recreational aide. He's currently working towards a career in school psychology and hopes to help children attain healthy lives. So thank you both so much for joining us today. And I'm going to hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. So as Lauren said, my name is Tara, and I'm so happy to be here today. So just a little overview of the program that we run. So as Lauren mentioned, it includes the domestic violence education and parenting after violence classes. Usually, before the pandemic, we were offering those in person. We would meet once a week for 3 hours for 6 weeks. We've since modified that. We're now doing the classes individually over the phone, still the 6 weeks, but each appointment lasts about an hour once a week. And we're actually working on redesigning the program to best meet the needs of our clients, given the current limitations that we have. I also do the one-on-one counseling with parents. And so the main goals of the program are really to help support parents as they navigate all of the challenges that they face after domestic violence. And so, it's really based in an empowerment model where we believe that clients have power. And so at the heart of domestic violence, it's all about power and control. And so helping clients to recognize and reclaim the power that they may have given up over their relationship. We also, it's based on, we do the work from a strengths-based perspective. And so for me, what that means is that I start with the belief that everybody is doing the best they can with what they have, and that all of our clients and the people that we work with are incredibly strong, and they have strengths that maybe they don't even recognize anymore. And one thing I just want to make a note about the language that I'll be using today. So I primarily work with mothers. We know that domestic violence can happen to all genders. It just so happens that most of the clients I work with are mothers, so I'll tend to use that language. And also, I'll tend to interchange between victim and survivor and client interchangeably. So just a heads up for the language I'll be using today.
All right, and so as Lauren mentioned earlier, I'm Desmond. I'm the children's program team lead. So Tara and I's job are very similar. So I also offer one-on-one counseling for parents and children. And a main goal of our program is to provide a safe environment for the children. We recognize that children coming in don't feel safe, and then they're coming into an environment where they don't know any of the adults, any of the other families or residents. So we just try to provide an environment where they can, one, be kids again, and two, where they can feel safe and be able to play and enjoy themselves while they're in shelter with their parents. All right, so just to get going with it, so we're going to go through some facts and statistics. A lot of what we do is based around this. We really try to focus on these things and really try to figure out what's the best way to serve our clients. So a boy who sees his mother being abused is 10 times more likely to abuse his female partner as an adult. A girl who grows up in a home where her father abuses her mother is more than 6 times as likely to be sexually abused as a girl who grows up in a non-abusive home. According to the CDC, in homes where DV occurs, there's a 45% to 60% chance there is co-occurring child abuse. And even when children are not direct victims, they still witness 68% to 80% of domestic assaults. So what these numbers means is that, we have a lot of parents who come in and we'll ask the question of, was your child a direct victim or was your child a witness? And then they'll say, no, they don't even know it happened. And a lot of times we'll have a conversation where even though they may not know it's happening, they can still be considered a victim of it.
So all of those statistics that Desmond just talked about, point to that children are affected by domestic violence. And so what we know is that children who experience domestic violence in their families are victims, even if they don't necessarily physically witness the violence. And so there are other ways that kids can witness domestic violence in their home. Some of those include actually, physically seeing the abuse happen, as well as observing the effects. So if there's been a fight and the next day, maybe mom has some bruises and broken bones or injuries, right? Or there's been damage done to furniture or property. Kids see that and they have an idea that something's happened here. Another way for kids to be aware of it is for other adults or people in their lives to tell them about the abuse. And then also hearing the abuse happen in the other room. Maybe mom and dad are fighting and it's getting out of hand, but they're in the other room. So the kids can hear it, but they're not necessarily seeing it. And what research shows us is this actually can be more traumatic for children, in part because their imaginations are so active. And so they may fill in the blanks with things that are more severe than what's happening. but it also really heightens their sense of powerlessness. They're hearing this happen and there's really not much they can do to protect their parent or to change what's happening. And so we know that however kids are experiencing it, if kids are exposed to domestic violence, they are victims and there are some impacts and effects that they'll be facing.
All right, so how does DV impact children? So a lot of children can be impacted by DV in a lot of ways, and it all depends on where they are developmentally. But some of the most common ones we see is that it wires their brain to expect danger. So for example, when children come into shelter, they tend to be on edge. They're expecting that danger to happen again because that's what they grew up around. That has become their new normal. And then they become stuck in fight, flight, or freeze. And the tricky thing about this is that our fight, flight, or freeze response is necessary for our survival as human beings. You know, we may be in the jungle, and let's say you see a bear or a tiger, you know, that fight, flight, or freeze response is triggered to allow you to get to safety. However, the issue arises when children are stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze for a long period of time, and it really significantly impacts their development. They also have no sense of safety. So when children see their parents going through abuse, their parents are supposed to be their safe space, who they're supposed to be safe around, comfortable around. So if they can't feel safe around their parents, at that point, no adult is safe to them. And all of this results in behavioral problems at all ages. So an important thing to remember is that chronic stress alters a child's development, mainly their physical development, their social and emotional development. And that's really a big component that we focus on in the children's program. We recognize that DV really makes an impact on these areas that limits their development and their cognitive growth. So really try to make a point to focus on those areas to help children grow and become resilient.
All right, so what we know is that the parents that we work with, they're facing a lot of challenges as they navigate life after domestic violence. So one of the challenges that they face, you know, they're often involved with various systems. Maybe there's criminal charges happening with their abuser because of violence that's occurred. Maybe CPS is involved, and maybe the children have been removed from their home. It could be that there's custody battles going on and legal involvement. So these are all very complex systems that can be very overwhelming for people to navigate. And an additional layer that's a challenge for the clients we work with is often the systems can re-victimize. So it's another situation where clients can feel a lack of power and control over their lives and the outcomes of what's going to happen. And when you're talking about custody and, you know, being with your children, there's a lot of pressure and stress there. And so one of the things that we work on with clients in talking about this is helping them to identify what is within their control and what choices they do have control over. But that is a huge challenge that they face, is navigating these systems that are complex and often can make decisions for that have very serious and real impacts on their lives and their children's lives. Also, navigating contact with the abusive parent. One thing that's a reality is that even after the abuse has stopped and the relationship is over, those children are a connection to the abuser forever, essentially, whatever that may look like. And so some abusers are more involved than others. But either way, the relationship with that abusive parent impacts not only the clients we work with, but their children. And so how can they navigate that in a way that keeps themselves safe and also protects and promotes their relationship with the child while keeping them safe as well? Also, we know that a lot of clients that we work with have a decrease in confidence in their parenting. Self-esteem in general really is diminished when you're in an abusive relationship. And so specifically parenting can definitely take a hit as well. And so, a lot of that is actually intentional on the abuser's part. Once that relationship is ended, for many abusive parents, the children are the way to maintain that power and control over their former partner. And oftentimes abusers are willing to use children to maintain that power and control. And so we'll actually see, intentional undermining of the other parent. And then also leading into talking about managing children's challenging behaviors. Children grow up in abusive homes and they learn from what they're seeing around them. And so oftentimes we see kids that are mimicking some of these abusive behaviors that their abusive parent engages in. I've had many clients who their abusive, the abusive parent has been not only undermining their authority as a parent, but also actually encouraging their child to behave in abusive ways. I've had clients whose children have actually been physically violent with them. And one of the unfortunate things that happens is sometimes the system's responses aren't the greatest. And so I've had a client who her son was being physically violent with her. And when the police came out, their recommendation was that the child go stay with his father. And what we know about the situation is that the father was actually encouraging this child to hit his mother, was encouraging these abusive behaviors. And so having the child stay with that abusive parent really isn't in the child's best interest. So this is another challenge that many of our clients are facing. And so how do you navigate parenting when your child is engaging in some of these really challenging behaviors? So we talk with our clients about that. And so working on sort of developing some responses and coping skills to navigating those challenging behaviors. And then many of our clients are also still sort of dealing with childhood trauma that they've experienced. We know that there is an intergenerational piece to domestic violence, right? If you grow up in a home where violence is happening and it's normal, you're more likely to end up in a relationship then where you're also either an abuser or you're being abused. And so for many of my clients that I've worked with, most of them have told me that they grew up in a home where there was domestic violence happening. And so now that's impacting how they view the world, but also how they're parenting their children. And so there's a lot of conversations that we have around that. In a lot of ways, some of them almost have to relearn parenting, sometimes parenting themselves, but also parenting their own children. And so that's some of what we talk about. And then also the lack of healthy and supportive adult relationships. People are part of systems. And so the systems and the families that we grow up in become our networks of support as adults. And so if the adults in your lives are unhealthy and unsupportive, then that's going to be a challenge for you if you're facing having to navigate these complex systems. And so that's also a challenge that we see with our clients.
So we discussed, what impact DV can make on a child. So now we can kind of discuss what that impact may look like on both children and parents, because that impact can look very similar. So a lot of what we see is ongoing anxiety and depression. This is something that we can see across all ages. We've had children in shelter who suffer from pretty severe anxiety, depression, dissociation, a lot of internalizing what they have been through. And that also includes emotional distress. We get kids who have a really hard time regulating their emotions. And sometimes there's days where they're awesome, they're in a great mood and want to interact with staff, with other kids. And then there's days where they, just want to go off and just like sit in the corner and just sit by themselves for a long time. There's no getting through to them because there's just this wall in between you. And then there's the low self-esteem. We see this a lot in our older children. They believe that that the abuse is their fault. They feel like they could have done more to protect the parent who was abused, or they think that the abuse was their fault. Maybe they upset abuser, or maybe if they didn't do this, then mom or dad would not have been abused in this way. And then there's the heightened aggression. We see this in a lot of kids who externalize. So that goes back to the fight, flight, or freeze. They feel that any inconvenience, anytime a child, may take a toy from them or hits them or anything like that, it triggers them and it results in heightened aggression. So, we've had kids who will storm out, of our gym and our playrooms and just, scream. And it's really, really difficult to get them back down, be able to regulate their emotions. But we recognize that that comes with the territory, and really work to, teach them, after the fact, how to regulate those emotions. And then there's attachment difficulties. We see this in a lot with babies. We may have a mom who's abused, and because mom has so much going on, with systems, dealing with the abuse, having to go through court systems, things like that, there's stress, exhaustion, and that really impacts how attached they are to their child. And as we know with babies, that attachment is very, very important to their development. Um, and then difficulty forming positive relationships. So children anticipate the trauma to reoccur, and then they also organize their relationships around the fear of abandonment or victimization. As I stated earlier, DV becomes their new normal because DV is ongoing. So they think that this is normal. They think this is how it's supposed to work. So the abandonment, the victimization, they expect it at this point, and it's really difficult to form positive relationships around that.
All right. And so for parents, this list is pretty much the same, right? So we know that, once the relationship ends, everything's not just rainbows and butterflies. There's work to do, right? And so they have that ongoing anxiety and depression and the emotional distress. Those effects last, and it takes time for healing to happen, as well as, an inability to regulate emotions. When you're living in an abusive relationship, your ability to regulate emotions is compromised. There's a lot going on. And so learning how to, again, or to get to a place where you're more confident in being able to. And as a parent, this is really important because you set the tone, you set the emotional tone of your household. And so as much as you're able to regulate your emotions, your children are going to be much better at regulating their emotions as well. And so this is a really critical thing for parents to gain that confidence in being able to do. In terms of low self-esteem, I touched on this a little bit earlier, but we know that, victims in these relationships, their self-esteem takes a hit, and that also includes parenting and the way they approach parenting and the confidence they have in setting boundaries and limits and disciplining their child. The heightened aggression, it's common to develop certain coping skills that might be a bit defensive, right? And they might feel some increased anger. The attachment difficulties, as Desmond was saying, navigating these systems can be overwhelming and complex, and the emotional availability of parents may be limited or compromised. And so, it's about taking a look at what challenges have there been and having that secure attachment with their young children, and how can we reconnect? How can you strengthen that relationship and secure that attachment more with children? And also, the reality is that for some of the clients that I work with, their children have been removed. So the attachment is not just necessarily emotional unavailability, but also they may be physically unavailable as well. And so what does reuniting look like? How do we strengthen that bond? And then difficulties having positive relationships. Clients kind of fall into, a couple different categories with that. Sometimes clients talk about really being afraid of even thinking about being in a relationship again, and not trusting to someone else and feeling comfortable opening up, but also wondering if they have the right judgment in terms of who's safe and who's not safe to have in their lives. And then we have clients who, we see them go from abusive relationship to abusive relationship. And so it can be hard for them to identify what are some of these red flags, what are things that I should avoid in a relationship. And then, obviously, if they continue to bring unsafe people around, that's going to present challenges for themselves and their children as well.
So looking at the impact DV takes and what that impact looks like, it's really important as service providers, teachers, relatives, or family friends to learn how to help children heal or be a support for them. The last thing you want to do is, come in and say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or present yourself as something that may trigger their child or make them feel even more unsafe than they already are. And one of the first things that we really want to do is ensure that they are safe with you. And you can tell children that you're safe with them, over and over and over again, but they're not going to feel safe with you until they can see that you're a safe adult. And this could mean just, saying, like, hi, how are you every day? Just staying consistent with how you interact with them. And validating their feelings. A lot of times with, as I mentioned earlier, we see kids with heightened aggression, emotional distress, and, they really have difficulty regulating their emotions. And, they may feel that, being upset and reacting the way they are isn't okay because that's what they've been told by their parent. But it's important to validate their feelings, letting them know that it's okay to be mad, it's okay to be angry, it's okay to be sad. One of the things that we really stress in the children's program is using the 3 R's. Regulate, relate, reason. So, we help them regulate emotions. This may include, helping them take deep breaths. So one thing we do is get bubbles, have the kids blow bubbles. And then once they're able to, calm themselves and be able to interact with you, you relate with them. You let them know that it's okay to be mad. Like, yeah, I get mad too. When you're an adult who they look up to, when you can relate to them on that level, that goes a long way. And then after you have that conversation, now that they're in a calmer state, now you can move into the conversation of how we can handle it better next time. What can we do next time? You can come and tell an adult. You can, go and do another activity. Take a couple minutes, take some deep breaths. Whatever it is that they feel comfortable with, regulating those emotions. That's a time for that conversation. Um, and accepting that they may not be ready to or don't want to talk about it at all. This is something that shouldn't be taken personally. This isn't anything against you. It's just, what they're feeling at the moment, and that has to be respected. There's been plenty of times where I meet a child for the first time, and I kind of let them know what I would like to do, like like activities, things like that, and they may just straight up say no to me, and that's fine. It's just a matter of, as I said earlier, staying consistent. Having small interactions with them throughout the day when you see them throughout the week. Just saying, hi, how are you? How's school going? Is there anything I can do for you? And I just leave it at that. That really goes a long way. And then eventually they may want to open up to you because now they see that you're a safe adult. And a really, really important point here is to recognize that their behavior is a form of communication. A lot of times we get parents who are having difficulty with their child's behavior, and they'll just continuously say that they're bad, that all they do is just act up for no reason. They don't know why they're doing this. And what we really, really stress is that there's no such thing as a bad child because behavior is a form of communication. Children can't communicate the same way that we do. So the best way for them to communicate is through their behaviors, through their body language. So a lot of times, you'll see a child who had a bad day at school. They'll come in, they're irritable, they're yelling at other kids. They come in, put their head down on the table. And at that moment, kind of give them their space a little bit. But as it continues on, just go up to them like, hey, is everything okay? How was school? And it could be something as simple as, that they're hungry or they're tired, anything like that. So really just recognizing, as I said earlier, that their behavior is a form of communication. And then, so with that, it's important to respond accordingly. So like I said, with the 3 R's, once you're able to have that conversation, how do you as a service provider, teacher, friend, relative respond to that conversation so that they can continue to feel comfortable with you? So these are all things that we do as staff in the children's program. These are all things that we discuss with parents as well, just to make sure that they're getting the same consistent care across the board. Because at the end of the day, what their parents do with them is, has a bigger impact than what we do with them. So we just try to maintain that communication with the parents as well to give them the skills to help their children heal, as Tara has said, a couple times in this presentation.
All right, so how can we help parents? One thing that we know is that a safe, nonviolent parent is a very critical protective factor for children who have experienced domestic violence. And so what does a safe adult look like? What does a safe, non-violent parent look like? How can we help parents achieve that? So a lot of the work I do with clients is helping them strengthen their own skills. And again, I come at this from the belief that my clients know what they're doing. They have what they need. And so it's just a matter of helping them tap into that and recognize the knowledge and experience that they already have and forming some, maybe some new skills to go along with it. And so we do spend a lot of time talking about self-care and self-care strategies and taking care of themselves first. Along with that, strengthening those parenting skills. So, creating consistent, appropriate discipline. As I mentioned before, abusers tend to be really good at undermining the other parent and their authority as a parent. And so the way the abusive parent impacts in many ways the way that that the other parent is parenting and the discipline style that they use. And so, having conversations about what are appropriate ways to discipline children, what are appropriate boundaries and limits and things like that to set with children. One of the big things that we talk about clients with is creating routines, because what we know is that a home where there's domestic violence happening is often very unstable and there's a lot of uncertainty. And so having routines, having some predictability can lead then to that sense of stability, which increases their children's feeling of safety. So that's a big part of what we talk about with clients. And then also having conversations about age appropriate responses to children. Again, kind of thinking about some of those challenging behaviors and how do we respond appropriately in a way that's not violent. Again, we learn from our parents how to parent, how relationships look. We teach our children those same lessons. And so, figuring out what is an appropriate way to respond to my child when they're, hitting me, or when they're screaming at me and saying these things to me that my abuser used to say, right? Like, how do we respond appropriately to children in those moments? And then also having conversations with the children about the abuse and about what they've experienced. This is beneficial for a few reasons. One, it really can help validate the child's experience and what emotions that they've had. One thing that tends to happen with children in these situations is they tend to blame themselves. They tend to get mixed messages about what's happening. The abuser may be telling them it's your fault or all of that, and so it can be really confusing. And so having these conversations with kids can open up that door to let them know that you're safe, that they can come to you, but also, again, it can provide a chance to validate that that they have experienced what they have, right? And to give them that validation. And it's also a really important opportunity to communicate information to children that might be helpful for them to hear. So things like, the abuse isn't your fault. I think that's messaging that children need to hear as much as it takes, right? Because again, it's common for kids to blame themselves and to take that on. And so letting them know it's not your fault. The abuse that happened in the family isn't your responsibility. Nothing you could have done could have changed it. Those kinds of messages, as well as, I'm here for you. You can come and talk to me anytime. I care about you. You're important, right? So having conversations about the abuse and what's happened in the home can provide an opportunity for this conversation, for this to be communicated to the child. And it's, probably not going to be a one-time conversation. I encourage clients, as the kids get older, they're going to have different questions, different concerns. So it's really about letting that child know that you're a safe parent they can come to and they can talk to, and validating their experience that they've had so far. And then also reconnecting with children. As I mentioned before, clients often, find themselves with the children removed from their home. So there's a sort of physical reconnection that happens. And then also the emotional reconnection, right? When you're in an abusive home, so much of your energy has to go to keeping the abuser satisfied and kind of off your back. And so there's not always emotional energy left to parent the way that you would like to and to take care of yourself. And so again, kind of going back to that attachment, how do we strengthen the bond with the parent and the child? How do we make that relationship strong and healthy? So having conversations with clients about, the choices they can make and what they can do to help their children in that situation. And so, what we know is that domestic violence is real. It happens everywhere, and children and families are impacted by it. And the impacts are serious, and we see them throughout the community. But we also know that humans are incredibly resilient, especially children. And so there's hope and resiliency and growth that's possible. And so children and families can absolutely overcome hard times, and children of domestic violence can and do grow up to be healthy and well-adjusted.
All right, and then so just there, there are a lot of resources for children and families who have experienced domestic violence or trauma in general. Number one, obviously, is the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and then there's the Haven House 24-hour hotline. And as Lauren mentioned earlier, we do have a chat option as well on the Child and Family Services website. And then Child and Family Services offers counseling services for children. And then there's the Family Help Center, who has a wide range of services for families. And then there's Gateway Longview, who also offers services for children. So, including like counseling and things like that.
You both provided such incredible insight to this tragedy in the lives of children experiencing domestic violence. And I certainly hope that this was a helpful presentation for those in the audience. I did want to switch gears and ask you both, you've encountered so many children over the course of your careers with Haven House. Was there ever a child that maybe stood out for you? Maybe a child who you've been on the journey with that has seen the light, has seen the positivity in an adult after experiencing domestic violence and has moved forward? Would you mind sharing?
Sure. So during the pandemic, the families that we've had in shelter have, didn't really have a, opportunity to leave much. So with this group of families, both myself and our recreational aides really got the opportunity to bond with this group more than any other group we've ever had. So in particular, there's one family who's been with us for some time now, and one of the children, she's a young girl, 4 years old, and when she came to us, she really had a difficult time, feeling safe with us. So she would go and hide behind the couch that we have in the playroom. She just really didn't want to interact with staff, with other kids. There are times where she would, just like cry and really just dissociate. So I sat down with my staff, and we really had to figure out what's the best way for us to, provide, a little extra care for this young girl who's going to be in our care, and who should be able to have fun back here and feel safe and be able to be a kid again. So we worked extremely hard. So one of the things we started doing was we included her on a lot of different tasks. So that included, if we had a painting activity, we would allow her to pass out the paintbrushes, help get things set up. Really make her feel included. And we continue with that. We stayed consistent with the way we interacted with her. And over time, we really started to see her feel more comfortable. So, there were days where she wouldn't come from behind the couch at all. And then 0 minutes turned into 5 minutes with us, 5 turned into 10, turned into 20. And then eventually she's been able to stay with us, interact with us for the entire playroom time. And, so when she sees myself, our staff in the hallway, she's running up and giving hugs, just extremely happy. So that's one that really stuck out to me. Like I said, with this group, kind of like being in quarantine, we really got a chance to really bond with the families here. So that's one that really stood out for me.
Yeah, so I kind of get to see things from a little bit of a different perspective, but one of the things that I get to see with clients who are completing the class, for many clients, it's on their menu, or CPS has asked for them to complete it before they're able to be reunited with their children. So I've had many clients come up to me when they've completed and say, you know what, this was the last thing I needed to do, and now I get my kids back. I've had clients say, next Friday I get my kids back now because of this. And so just the joy and hope that these parents are facing and experiencing as part of completing the class and looking forward to having their kids back. I had one client that I worked with during the process of when her children were removed from her care, and she had limited access to them in visitation. And so a lot of what we talked about was, you have these limited moments so that you're parenting. What choices can you make in these moments that are going to be best for you and your kids? And how do you use that time to support them as best as you can? So that was one conversation we had. And then I also have clients that I've been working with individually. One comes to mind. I've been working with her for a little over a year now. And when we first started working together, her confidence as a parent and as, just as an adult was really shot. And there was a lot of conversation going back and forth between her and her abuser, who is her ex-husband and father of their 3 children. And a lot of the conversation was her trying to kind of get him to see things her way. And it was him playing out those old abusive tactics and scenarios through the relationship with the children. And so we had a lot of conversations about, is this conversation necessary? Do you need to have this conversation with him? And again, kind of coming back to what is within your power, what's in your control, what choices can you make here in this situation, that will help protect you and your kids. And so over the last year or so that I've been working with her, seeing the healing that's happened, seeing the growth, seeing her confidence go up. And, she's still in the thick of it in terms of dealing with some really challenging behaviors with her children. But seeing how she responds, she knows how to reach out for support. She is aware of sort of what she can control. And, she'll say to me things like, well, this is what I want to say, but, this is where I am. Right. And so just seeing that growth, seeing her heals, and then what that means for the health and well-being of her children. That kind of thing is an incredible part of the work that I do. And I've been very grateful to, experience witnessing that growth with her and other clients as well.
Oh, that's fantastic, you guys. We are getting a couple of questions in. For those of you who haven't typed in any questions, please feel free to do so. One question that came in is geared best towards you, Tara. Someone is curious if there's any advice that you have for responding to boys who are so volatile with their mother that they are no longer safe to be with her. Custody is often changed to the abusive father. Any thoughts on how that parent can respond to those young boys?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's unfortunately a reality that I think happens quite a bit. So I think one couple of things. First of all, I think recognizing that the abuse that's happening for the child against the parent, that's really complicated and challenging for that parent to face. I would encourage, there are really great resources available in the community. This program, I can work one-on-one with parents, but it's the more intensive programming. So there's wraparound services that are offered through the county. They do phenomenal work. They're able to come in and sort of customize the programming to best serve that family. And so that's a really good service that's available. I would encourage, people to reach out possibly for that. I think one fear or concern that parents often have in reaching out to get additional supports or bringing in interventions into their home is how it might be viewed in the court system. I've had parents explain to me that they don't want to reach out for help because they're afraid that the courts will see that as them not being able to control or parent their children. And what I have found is that actually, if you're reaching out for help, what you're demonstrating is that you're willing to, reach out to do things that will support your children. And then I think in terms of in the moment when your child is having an abusive moment or a violent outburst, I think the important thing is to, as best as you're able, regulate your own emotions, walk away from the situation. Obviously, you want to make sure that the child is safe first, right? You're not leaving them in a situation where they could harm themselves or somebody else. But once safety is accounted for, ignore the behavior, walk away, don't respond, don't react. And I know that's so much easier said than done. But as much as you're able to not escalate those behaviors, it will help that child, especially over time, to sort of learn that you're capable of responding in a way, and it will help sort of set those boundaries for that child. Does that?
I think you answered it, Tara. Yes, that's a great point. Another question that came in, perhaps the both of you could touch upon it, is, what, given the circumstances of life these days where things are more virtual, hence this virtual speaker series, how is it best to work with children currently, given certain limitations that we're dealing with now? And can you meet personally or virtually with a child or a parent? And if virtually, how has that affected the effectiveness of the meeting with the child or parent?
So I can start. So as Tara mentioned earlier, our jobs are very similar, but also very different. So I work in the shelter component. So even through the pandemic, I was still showing up to shelter. So I was still able to have that face-to-face communication with the children and the parents. A lot of them, weren't the most comfortable with meeting face to face, even though they were, we're all like, in like the shelter together. A lot of them, would like want to like change to another day or just, kind of like, like, maybe not today, maybe another time. But I think as far as, like meeting virtually, I think that's something that Tara can probably touch upon a little bit more.
Yeah, um, so I don't work directly with children, so I can't speak to like virtual appointments with children. However, the classes, so switching to, so we've actually done all one-on-one over the phone. So I haven't been using any video platforms. It's all been telephone appointments. But with that, there's benefits and there's drawbacks. So the upside has been that many barriers have been removed. So, transportation, childcare, right? For clients attending the classes, especially, getting there and having someone to watch their kids was a huge barrier. And so now they don't have to, make those arrangements, and that helps a lot. Um, the flip side of that is just, a matter of getting the material to clients. Some of those logistical things has been a bit of a challenge. Not all of our clients have easy access to technology, and we also have to be very mindful of safety. If clients are still with their abuser, we have to be mindful of how we're getting them material in a safe way. So we do have those things to consider. It does seem like the class, being able to present it in an individual way, offers more of a personalized experience for clients. It is, missing that group piece that I think is helpful. And we're, like I said, we're working on redesigning the program. So hopefully we can reincorporate some of that in a different way. But yeah, I think overall, our clients, continue to be resilient. And so this is just one more opportunity for them to show how resilient and strong they are. And so there've been some challenges, but we've also, there's some benefits as well to doing things virtually.
You make a great point there, Tara. If we can't emphasize enough today in this webinar, it's that children and parents after experiencing domestic violence are resilient. There is hope, and that intervention piece is the most crucial and the first step of the journey. We're getting a couple more questions from individuals who are really in the field and working as care providers. Maybe the both of you could touch upon different recommendations, maybe one piece of advice that you would offer to someone who's working as a therapist or a clinician with parents who've experienced domestic violence as well as children.
Yeah, I think as an advocate, as a healthcare professional, as a clinician, therapist, I think, a really, really important key that you can teach, adults, children, mainly for adults at this point, but teaching them how to advocate for themselves, especially in the field of healthcare, in the medical field. I think a lot of us are aware of the fact that there are a lot of health inequities out there, especially towards, especially including like women of color. So I think it's important to, really teach them how to advocate for themselves because, as survivors of domestic violence, that feeling of that confident feeling of being able to advocate for themselves and let them know that they can speak out if they feel like something isn't right. I think that's a very important skill to teach them. So really having a conversation of like what they can do, things to look for, and what language to use if they feel like the level of care is inadequate. And this goes beyond, healthcare. This could be including systems with Department of Social Services, getting their children into, childcare, anything like that. So I think really teaching them how to advocate for themselves is a really, really important skill that you can teach your clients.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Desmond. And I think, along with what you were saying about helping clients learn how to advocate, one of the things they've learned from their abuser is that their voice doesn't have value and it's not to be heard. And so, and there's a lot of fear around speaking up and using your voice. And so empowering clients to find ways that is safe for them to advocate. I think that's wonderful advice. And I think I would just add to that, as service providers, whatever your role is working with parents or children, really taking care of yourself. And I know that self-care has kind of become like a buzzword, but this work is tough. It takes a toll and it's wonderful. It's rewarding work, but it does take a toll, and we're living in times that are quite challenging. And so I think, just making sure you're taking care of yourself, so you're bringing your best self to the table when you're doing this work with children and families. I think that would be, my biggest piece of advice.
That's a fantastic point. It is grueling, but so rewarding, the work that we're encountering, because it has such a large and generational impact on so many. So that's a great point. I don't see any more questions at this time. So I guess I'll begin to wrap up. Thank you both, Desmond and Tara, for your time today. I hope this work and this insight and this advice was valuable to those who attended. We thank you for joining us this afternoon. I do want to mention that we will be sending out a survey to those of you who've attended today. Please take a minute or so to take that for us. Your feedback is critical so that we can make sure that these are helpful for the future. I regret to I was remiss to not mention that today is actually Wear Purple Day at the beginning of this webinar. So please check out the Child and Family Services Facebook page. You'll notice a number of photos from myself and colleagues who are participating in Wear Purple Day. It is a national day of remembrance for survivors of domestic violence. We do have some great, interesting topics and articles on our Facebook page too. So I hope that's also valuable insight as well. I want to mention to everyone that our fourth and final webinar in the Domestic Violence Awareness Month speaker series will take place next Thursday at 12 o'clock noon. We will be joined by a survivor who has been touched by the community at large. Linda Dynell will be joining us. She's also an author. She has promised to give away a couple of copies of the book that she wrote, Leaving Dorian, to participants of the webinar. So please join us. It'll be a very riveting story, and the emphasis on how community has helped her will be crucial for all of us to hear that conversation. So again, thank you all so much. We have Haven House's hotline available at 884-6000. Child and Family Services link is in the chat function. And we will also send out Tara and Desmond's emails in the survey link if you do want to touch with them personally. So again, thank you all so much. We appreciate your time, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.